What does it really look like to face a giant? Hey, everybody. Welcome to The Whole Truth, where I am taking you through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation, and we are not skipping anything. You probably don't need an introduction, but just in case you do, this is my lovely assistant, Vanna.
His lovely wife.
This is my wife, Kelly. You guys will see her on the Happy Chaos podcast, but she's joining me today on this special episode of The Whole Truth. So this would be a good time to kind of explain what's happening with our, maybe kind of our whole ministry.
Yeah.
We have The Whole Truth as the kind of umbrella, or maybe we should say kind of Pastor Justin Walker as the umbrella ministry.
Yes.
And so there's the Whole Truth website, and then there's this Bible study that I've been working on for the last 5 years of going all the way through the entire Bible, teaching all the way through the entire Bible. But then that has an expansion of I preach sermons on Sunday morning. And so we're incorporating those sermons and those Bible studies that I teach live to the congregation. We have all those Wednesday night Bible studies, and I'm working at getting those over to that website as well. And then we have this new thing that's just about 5 months old. Is it 5 months?
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 months old.
5 months.
And that is that Kelly and I are both widowed. And so we found each other. The Lord put us together, and we got married back in December. And so now we have this marriage ministry. And we had a little saying around our house when somebody would say, how's things going, now that we're married? And we would say, it's happy chaos.
Yeah.
And so, and we meant that in the truest sense. Like, we're happy, but it's difficult.
I feel like chaos gets such a bad rap.
Yeah.
But this is definitely not bad. Happy chaos is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it wasn't meant to be a negative thing.
Yeah.
But I think the people with large families get it.
Yeah,
They're like,
for sure.
oh, I get it. We actually had somebody just the other day say, oh, we love that happy chaos.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what it is. And so, by the way, I guess I should have told you in case you don't know, between the two of us, we have 9 children. And now we have a grandbaby.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyways, lots going on. Glad you guys are here with us today on the special episode. Today is the story of David and Goliath. It is probably one of the most well-known stories in the Bible. People who don't even know anything about the Bible, if you were to say David and Goliath, would know, oh, it's the story of, some guy who fought a giant, or slayed a giant. And then, even the most novice of Bible scholars could say, oh, well, David killed the giant with a sling and a stone. I've heard some people say he killed him with a slingshot, but that's not accurate. It's not a slingshot. It's a sling.
Yeah.
I should have pulled that down in this desk. I actually have a sling that someone made me at church, and they gave it to me, and they gave me these stones. Becky gave it to me, and she wrote on the stones, she wrote different Bible verses on each of the stones and gave it to me a while back. I almost used it as a sermon illustration for last week, but the Lord just really laid it on my heart to do something different with that sermon, and so I didn't do exactly that. So, anyways,
And like you're saying, everybody knows the story of David and Goliath. But I'm telling you, this series that you're doing, The Real House of David, is it sheds a totally different light on this whole story. Like you have brought this to life with your series. And I really do recommend people go and check out the series.
Yeah, for sure. And it'll be, as it comes out, it'll get, I'll put it over onto the Whole Truth website as well, because it's just part of the rounded ministry as a whole. So we have Bible study, we have sermons, and now we have this marriage ministry, which is in the video series. You can tell the difference in the videos. If that light says happy chaos, then that's the podcast, that's the marriage ministry side.
Yeah.
But when it's Bible study time, that light goes up.
Yeah.
Anyways, apparently we like neons.
They're awesome. I love them.
So in the story of David and Goliath, let's get together on this, because I know some of you all watch these videos and you use them for your Bible study. So I want to get right into the text. I don't plan to make this a super long video. I want to go through the text, and I want to show you. I've said it this way, like, what does it really look like to face a giant? Because the story of David and Goliath, the sling and stone part, did you know that's only one verse?
Yeah, I know that now.
I said it on Sunday, so you knew that. And the actual battle scene of David going and fighting Goliath, 4 verses. But this text that we're about to go through, 58 verses. 58 verses of the story of David and Goliath. So what is all of this that surrounds the story of David and Goliath? These 4 verses of David going and facing this giant. It's not like he walked out on a field one day and was like, "Ooh, there's a giant. Let me get him."
Right.
That's not how it went. So it actually looks like this. Let's go over the story together. If you remember from the last video that David just he had just been anointed by Samuel the prophet, and then he was invited into the house of Saul to play music for Saul. I divided that here on The Whole Truth into 2 videos, and we did anointed and appointed, and then we did prepared and it was another P. And now I lost my train of thought. What was it? It was position, prepared and position. So it was anointed and appointed and prepared.
I knew prepared was the first word. I just didn't know.
Yeah, because David was ready to play because he'd been out in the field playing his harp and been practicing. And then he was positioned. The Lord put him in Saul's house, but he's not quite he's not on the throne, even though he's been anointed, but he's not on the throne yet, but he's been filled with the Holy Spirit. It's coming off of that. And we'll start with the first, I have the study notes, by the way, if you guys want those. They're over on Patreon. You can get those study notes. They're available. So we'll start with the first 16 verses. So now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle and were gathered at Sukkah, and which belongs to Judah, and they encamped between Sukkah and Azekah in the Ephes Demim. And I know that sounded maybe like gibberish to a point, but that's to say that they're in the tribe of Judah, or in the land that's in the tribe of Judah. Okay, so that's where we are right now, is in Judah, and the Philistines have infiltrated and they've come in the tribe of Judah. Okay, so in verse 2, Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on one mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a bronze helmet on his head, and was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 500 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. And now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. And a shield bearer went before him. And then he stood and cried out with the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up in battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. And if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem of Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons, and the man was old, advanced in years, in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul into the battle. The names of his sons that went into battle were Eliab the firstborn, next to him was Abinadab, and the third was Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Whew, that was a mouthful already. But in those first 16 verses, the picture that you get is this. Saul remember, he's going through he's going crazy. He's going through depression and anxiety and all those crazy things. You know, he's going through, I'm not saying that depression is like you're crazy if you're depressed. That's not when I said that. But just like he's going through a lot.
Yes.
And this evil spirit comes upon him, and he's losing his mind. We'll see later. We'll see him like attacking David when he's, filled with this spirit or, under the influence of the spirit. So Saul is going through that, and David's been playing music for Saul. The Philistines came and arrayed themselves. They aligned themselves to battle. The Philistines start the battle. They're picking the fight. And so Israel goes out to go fight. Saul, the king, goes with Israel to go fight. You have Israel on one side and you have the Philistines on the other side. The Philistines started the fight. When they all get out and line up, here comes this giant guy. His name is Goliath. He comes out walking. I mean, you can just imagine the view of what it must look like as you can hear his giant armor clanking together. I mean, it probably sounds like,
How many feet did you say about that he?
I mean, it depends on how big a cubit was at the time, because a cubit was from the tip of your the tip of your elbow to the tip of your finger. So a cubit was the king's, whatever the king was, that was a cubit at the time. So around 15 inches is typical. Okay. And so he's somewhere between 8.5 feet, 9 feet tall. So here's this 9 foot tall dude, 8.5 foot tall dude that comes walking out. But to help put that in perspective, I mean, to be 9 foot tall would mean that he, even to look proportionate and not look like a beanpole, for him to look like a proportionate person, he probably had to have weighed 650 or 700 pounds. So, I mean, he's a big guy. And again, the same thing with like this armor that he's wearing. It's weighed out in shekels, and there's some different estimations of what that would have meant to be weighed in shekels. But most scholars would agree that his armor alone would have been like 200 to 250 pounds. So, if you've ever tried to bench press 200 pounds, I think I've heard that like 1% of men can bench press 200 pounds or something like that. And so, if you've ever tried to bench press 200 pounds, you would recognize like how heavy that is. And that was what he wore across his body. He's wearing, 200 pounds and comes walking out. So that's what I'm saying. Like, you can just imagine like the kind of earth shaking and the way, if you've ever been like beside train tracks and the metal is like hitting, that's kind of what I picture of sound, as he comes marching out, and he's their secret weapon, if you will. And he says, why have you lined up against me? So you got to remember, they're all lined up. They're ready for war. This is old time battle. So, they are literally lined up man for man. They're not just going to, bomb something. They're going to go in a sword fight, spears and swords and shields. And so Israel is lined up. Philistines are lined up, and then coming out from the back, towering over everybody. Here comes this Philistine, and he says, why are we all lined up like this? Why would you line up like that against me? If you just send out one guy, and if you send out one guy to fight me and he beats me, we'll be your slaves. But if I beat him, you guys will be our slaves. And this is the thing that we read. Saul and all of the army with Saul, they were dismayed. Like, they are scared to death. And then even worse than Saul the king being afraid and all the people being afraid is that Goliath, he does this for the next 40 days. Now, 3 of David's brothers, he's got 8 brothers or 7 brothers. He's the 8th. And so he's got these 7, go ahead.
How come they don't speak about, is there anything spoken about the other brothers? The other 5 brothers? Because they speak about the 3 in David.
Yeah, not that I can recollect. I don't know that. But we do know, an interesting part is that we do know that Eliab was a big guy.
Yeah.
When Samuel went to go and anoint David, he went to the house of Jesse. He saw Eliab first, and he goes out like he's going to go anoint Eliab. And the Lord told Samuel, no, don't look at his physical appearance. Don't look at his stature. And so there was an indication there that Eliab was not a small guy, that he was a big built guy. He was a man. And, here's David. He's a shepherd boy. He's, 15 years old, 16 years old. Even if he was fit for 15 or 16 years old, doesn't mean that he was big.
Right.
He's small, he's good looking, but he's not a man yet. Right. And in this story, David is still not a man. Yeah. He is a teenage boy. And so, he is an adolescent. And so it's the 3 older ones that go because they're men. So you have men of fighting age, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah. These 3 guys, they're sons of Jesse. They're the brothers of David. And so they go out to the fight. Here's this guy presenting himself. So big Eliab, he doesn't go. Do you all remember, you might remember here on The Whole Truth, that we actually went over Saul, and Saul was head and shoulders above everybody else. And so Saul's not a small guy. He's probably 7 foot tall. So here's 7 foot tall Saul, here's big Eliab, and they're all part of the trembling. They're all part of the dismay. And this goes on for 40 days. This is the first thing I would give you guys, and then we'll move forward with the text, which is that the first thing that you have to get over when you're talking about facing a giant is fear. You know, when you're actually facing a giant, I think that metaphorically, I used our school when we were, you know, in church on Sunday, I used our school as the example, but the example goes way further. When you're facing a giant in your life, when there's something, you know, the Lord says with the faith of a mustard seed, you can move something, a mountain, right? When you're facing that mountain, when you're facing that giant, I'm putting that, now this is a real story. I believe this absolutely happened. I totally believe David was a real guy. Goliath was a real guy. This really was a battle that really happened in the ancient world.
Yep.
Okay, so totally believe that, but stick with me. Metaphorically, there are mountains in our way. Metaphorically, there are giants in our way. And I think that, you know, the first thing we have to recognize that you have to overcome is the giant that you face, the mountain that you face. There are lots of people that tremble before this giant. There are lots of people that are dismayed before this giant. The first thing you're going to have to overcome is the fear. And I would say that fear is like, it's your own fear and also the fear of everybody else. David doesn't really seem to be afraid, but I think in our time, fear is one of those things that you're going to have to deal with. The first part of facing the giant is you got to face that as the fear that it is. Like, I've got to get over this fear of whether it's losing, you know, what's going to happen at the other end, you know what. I think that we permit fear in our lives by playing out the scenario and going, well, you know, we call it being cautious. We call it being prepared. But the truth of the matter is many times it's fear that's holding us back.
That's true.
And so the first thing you're going to have to get over is fear. Let's look forward in the text, unless you got a question for me. Okay, we'll read next. You can look on your study notes there. We'll be next in 17 through 30. So chapter 17, verse 17 through 30. Then Jesse said to his son David, take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves and run to your brothers at the camp and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000 and see how your brothers fare and bring back news of them. And now Saul and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And so David arose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army, and David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper and ran to the army and came and greeted his brothers. And then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming out from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. And so David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. And so the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him and the king will enrich with great riches and will give him his daughter and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. And then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in this manner, saying, so it shall be done for the man who kills him. And now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? And I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? And then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Okay, I told you it's a big chapter today. So that was verses 17 through 30. And we now see the second thing that happens. David is sent into the battle. He was relieved from working with Saul because Saul's out at the battle. So he doesn't have to play the harp for Saul when Saul's going crazy. So now David goes home. David's dad, Jesse, is older, sends David with cheeses and some food and supplies, and sends David to go into the battle and go check on his brothers and bring back word. So David takes all the supplies, goes to the battle, but all the men are lined up. They're all going out to fight for the day, like army against army. They're all fighting with each other. So now the Israel's going to go fight with Philistines. The Philistines are coming to fight with Israel. They're shouting. They're literally shouting and running into the battle. David hears that, leaves the supplies with the supply keeper, and runs into the battle to go find out from his brothers. He's there greeting his brothers and meeting with his brothers. I mean, you can imagine the scene. Off over here, they're literally fighting with each other. They're shouting and fighting. It's a battle scene. And David is over here hunched down with his brothers, checking on his brothers. And all of a sudden, who shows up? Goliath, saying the same thing that he said before. Goliath shows up and he's like, why are we lined up? Why are you fighting? Send out one man to fight me. If one man can kill me, we'll be your servants. Well, everybody's running away. It literally says they were like deathly afraid. They were so afraid that they come running back into the battle. And then somebody starts saying, have you heard what Saul is offering? Saul has made an offer. If anyone can kill this Goliath, then that person is going to be exempt from taxes, get his daughter as a wife, which means they're going to be part of the royal family or get to marry into the royal family. So they're going to be part of the royal family, marry his daughter, exempt from taxes, and he's going to enrich them. He's going to give them money and riches for taking care of this Goliath that is causing everybody so much fear. But this has been going on for 40 days. So for 40 days, they've all been running in fear. It's been going on way too long. David hears it for the first time. And then David hears what Saul said, and David goes, what? What are you all waiting on? And then he says this, he goes, who is this Philistine? Who is this Philistine that everybody is scared of him? And what's Saul gonna give us? Well, they go repeating it. These people start saying to David, David's now asking these other people. He was talking to his brothers, now he's asking these other people. The battle's going on in the background. You can kind of see the chaos of it.
Oh, yeah.
And you can just almost see Eliab like grabbing David by the shoulder. And he's like, I know what you're doing. And he accuses him of this, and this is my point. He says, your pride and your insolent. That insolent literally means like disrespectful, like insolence of your heart is what he says. It literally means like you're here to disrespect us. Like you're coming, you can almost imagine like this. Imagine like an older brother grabbing his younger brother and being like, David, this is not a game.
Yeah.
You know, that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's like, I know what you're doing and you're full of pride and you're disrespect. Now, it's interesting that he would call him full of pride because remember that Eliab was there the day that Samuel took that oil and anointed David. It says that Samuel did that in the midst of his brothers. And yet now look at what he says. He says, I know what you're doing. You're full of pride.
Yeah.
Now, what did David do that looked prideful to this point? They didn't invite David to when Samuel was coming up to sacrifice. They left David out in the field. And yet they look at him and they go, I know what you're doing. You're full of pride. Here's the second thing you got to deal with. The first one is fear. The second one is this. You got to deal with all of the doubt and the insults and the accusations of your own brothers and sisters. You would think when you're facing a giant that the first thing that you got to do is like deal with the giant. But the first thing you got to deal with is the fear.
Yeah.
The second thing you have to deal with is all of your brothers and sisters that ought to support you, but that don't. All of the people that should champion you, but that don't. When I first planted the church, I remember that, you know, in my mind, it was like all of these church people were going to be like, you know, championing that they'd be like, you know, coming to visit or offering to help, that churches would be excited about the idea that there's going to be another, you know, another church, another person reaching out. And in my mind, it looked like this, that, you know, if we were looking at our, if you look at like the demographics, this isn't the numbers of what it was back then, but, you know, right now, if you looked at the demographics of our church, you know, there's like 40,000 people surrounding in the counties surrounding our church. Within a driving distance of our church, there's about 40,000 people, which is not a ton of people compared to where we were when we were closer to Louisville. But you know, where we are now, there's about 40,000 people in those surrounding counties. And so you would go, oh, 40,000 people, that doesn't sound like a ton. Well, our church is sitting around 400, 500 people. So just do the math. If it's 40,000, if you were to make 10 of our churches, you would still only have 1/10 of the number that you would need. So you could make 100, repeat our church 100 times over before all those people in those counties would have a seat inside of a church. And so, you know, my perspective is when I first planted the church was like, there is plenty of room for a church And I believe that God uses all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. And so I totally believe that there are some pastors who are going to reach some people, but other people aren't going to pay attention to them. And then there's another pastor that those other people who won't pay attention to guy number one, but they will hear guy number two.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. Maybe it's experience, maybe it's the presentation, maybe it's location, whatever it is, they'll hear one, but they won't hear another. But that was not the way that it was perceived. Do you know what I've received over and over? Here I am planting a church, starting a church. I'm asking no one for anything. I haven't taken any money from anybody. I didn't run around and get people to come from other churches to come to our church. Our church planting group was 4 people. And purposefully, we were like, we will not ask anyone who's in a church to come to our church.
Yep.
We wouldn't do it. We called it sheep swapping.
Yep.
And yet, you know what I heard from church people? Why plant another church around here? Why not just tell people to come to our church? I heard it about the church that I was at where I was a youth minister. People were like, I had one guy tell me, he's passed away now, so I can share this a little freer. But he came to me and he was like, why are you going to run around town and get people to come to your new church? Why don't you run around town and get people to come to this church? And I remember looking at him and I was like, what do you think I've been doing for 7 years as a youth pastor here?
Right.
But it wasn't just him. I mean, I remember there's a large church that's around here, and somebody was a member of that large church, and they were like, Justin, what resources are you going to be able to offer the community that this large church doesn't already offer? And they were like, you're just going to be offering the same thing. Why don't you take your time and your effort and just lead people over here? But God had called me to something, and I knew I was supposed to do it. And so it's interesting that the first thing you got to do is get over your fear, and the second thing you got to get over, the second hurdle that you'll have is your own brothers and sisters throwing out insults and accusations and, accusing you of something. I remember one woman looked at me, Christian woman in church, who looked at me and she was like, do you really think that you're going to be able to teach any better than so, she talking about her own pastor, Pastor so-and-so. And I'm like, I'm not comparing my teaching ability to somebody else's teaching ability. I'm just saying this is what God's called me to do.
And you know what I've realized? When God calls you to do something great, there's always huge opposition.
Yes. Yeah.
Always. Throughout everything.
But that opposition is not always the person on the opposing side.
Right.
Sometimes it's like within your own
your
own circle, within your own friends. I mean, for David, it was like his own brother Eliab. But for us as Christians, how many times is it our own Christian brothers and sisters that are trying to hold us back from the thing that God's called us to do?
Right.
All right, so let's look forward now. Back onto your notes. We'll pick up in verse 31, and I'm going to read down through verse 40. So we're in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 31. And now when the words of David, which spoke, were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. And then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail him. Because of him, your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth. He is a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took the lamb out of the flock, I went after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard, struck it and killed it. And your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord has delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear. He will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. And so Saul clothed David with his armor and put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with a coat of mail. But David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk in these, for I have not tested them. And so David took them off. And then he took a staff in his hand. He chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch, which he had, with his sling in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Okay, so here goes David. He's in the battle. He looks at his brother, and when his brother had insulted him, he just looks at his brother and says, is this not for a reason? And think about like that line. He said, is this not for a reason? That was his reply to his brother. And then he just ignored the rest. Mm-hmm. He wasn't totally disrespectful where he ignored his brother altogether and just scoffed and looked the other way.
Right. He
gave an answer. He said, is what I'm doing not for a reason? Mm-hmm. And what is that reason? Is Eliab going after Goliath?
Right, no.
Is Abinadab? Mm-mm. Is Shammah? Mm-mm. Is Saul? No one's going after this Goliath. Goliath is out here making everybody fearful. They're all running and retreating every time Goliath comes out. And David goes, am I not asking for a reason?
Right.
Is there not a problem that you can see? And so I just love the way that he replied by giving him a reason, but then moving on. He ignored the insults. But word gets around to Saul. This is where we picked up. Word gets around to Saul. Saul now hears what David wants to do. And Saul, remember, this is Saul's servant who's been playing music for Saul. So for Saul, he's out in the battle. And he looks over, he's like, David, what are you doing here? And there's people telling him, David is saying he'll go fight Goliath. And I can just imagine, here's Saul. If you've been reading with us in 1 Samuel, Saul has been in battle. Battle is no joke. I mean, we're talking about blood. We're talking about gore. We're talking about horrific things. What we would go through today, and then we would say, we would probably say that Saul had PTSD.
Right.
You know, he has seen a battle. He has seen what it looks like, and he knows how ugly it is, and he knows what it must be like to have to fight against the Philistines, and he knows what he probably is going. They fight dirty. They don't play like David. Their goal is to kill you. This is not a fist fight where you walk away with a bloody nose.
Right.
This is the Philistine. It wants to kill you, and so Saul gives him what I would call expert advice.
Yeah.
Here's the expert saying, the expert of war saying, you can't do that. And this is the reason that you can't do that. And he says, you're but a youth, and he's been fighting ever since he was a youth. And so I love, well, before I want to get to that, before I say what David did, what I love that David did, let's just talk about that third thing that you're going to have to face. When you're facing a giant, first it's fear, then it's your own brothers and sisters, opposition from your own team, if you will, friendly fire. And then if you're truly going to face a giant, you're going to have to get past the expert advice. Because the experts are always the ones to tell us why we can't do the thing that we think that we have been called to do, or that we know that we've been called to do.
I think that's because of the faith element, though. You know, the things we're called to do, you walk out in faith.
Yeah. It's the same thing as what David had just said to his brothers.
Yeah.
Is this not for a reason?
Right.
What was the reason that no one else was taking on Goliath? They didn't have the faith to take on Goliath.
That's right.
They saw it as they were going to lose.
They didn't have the faith in David either.
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, I mean, let's be realistic. I always love to do that on this channel. Let's be realistic. If you're in a scenario where there's this 9-foot tall dude who, you know, like one blow, he's going to knock you across the room. You know, the expert advice of, you know, trying to tell us not to do what God has told us to do. But here's the reality of it. All great things that have been done are in defiance to what the experts have said. I'm not saying that there's not some value in listening to expert advice, but I am telling you that when you're facing a giant and you know that this is what you're supposed to do, seeking the advice of the experts is not always the best. As a matter of fact, what happens next? So Saul tells David, you can't fight him. And Saul, I think, was coming from a good place.
Right.
Saul is not insulting him. He's just trying to protect him. In his mind, he's like, you're going to die if you do that. And what's David's reply to him? To his brother, he said, is it not for a reason? But to Saul, what did he say? I've killed a lion and I've killed a bear. This is a teenage boy. He's like, I've killed a lion and I've killed a bear with my bare hands.
That's right.
Because they were coming after the sheep.
That's right.
And I think that there's two parts of that I want to point out. The first one being that he's using the experience of what God has already brought him through to recognize that God will bring him through this as well. Okay? And part of that too is David knows he's been anointed as the king.
Yeah.
So part of that faith is to say, the Lord anointed me as the king. I'm not quite the king yet. So like he could say, like, I have confidence, I have faith that the Lord is going to deliver me from this Philistine's hand. The Lord's going to take care of this Philistine, and the Lord's already this is part of that, like what we talked about before. The Lord has prepared him. He's looking back and he goes, the Philistine will be just like the bear and the lion. The Lord's going to take him out. And so I love that, like, David used his, like, past experience as the thing to keep him from being fearful that, you know, somehow he's gonna lose this fight.
Yeah.
But But even more than that is what happened next, as David was then given Saul's armor. So here's the expert who says, okay, well, if you're going to go, and he gives David his armor, and David puts on his armor and then goes, I can't move in this.
Who's
Like,
gonna hold me back?
yeah, your armor is going to hold me back. And remember, by the way, there's still the problem, and Saul's not going after the problem. And yet he's acting like the expert and saying, oh, you shouldn't because of this reason. But then he goes, okay, well, if you're going to go here, put on my armor. David puts the armor on, and then he even takes that off. And I would just say to remember this, that you don't need to do whatever God's called you to do. You don't need whatever the world or whatever's been done already. You don't need that.
That's right.
It's usually when God's calling you to something great, part of that great is that it is unique. And that it's not there, like you're not there to do it the way everybody else has always done.
He's equipped you.
That's right. This is not a biblical example, but I think about the example of what I once heard about Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs went into a meeting. They were, if you guys remember, like way back in the day, there was Napster. Remember Napster?
Yep.
And so the music industry didn't know what to do. You know, people were downloading music for the first time. And, you know, our little players, and, you know, back then you'd go get an MP3 player, and our little MP3 players could hold hundreds of songs. I mean, I remember being so excited because I bought this MP3 player and I was like, this can hold like 10 CDs. and so, and you know, it really was like this plastic boxy thing that could hold 10 CDs. And the music industry was like, what are we going to do? And if you remember, they actually sued a few people, like regular people, because I don't even know whatever happened to them, to be honest with you, because they had downloaded like millions of songs off of Napster, and they were like, you got to pay for all of those songs. Well, Steve Jobs went into a meeting, at least I've heard that Steve Jobs went into a meeting to go talk about all of this. And he went into this meeting and he said, here's what I'm proposing. And what he was proposing was a platform, Apple Music. He was proposing a platform where people could download songs for 99 cents. He said, stop making them buy the whole album. He was like, you already put 14, 15, 16 songs on the album anyways. Let them download it for a price that they'll pay. They'll pay 99 cents. To get the song. They'll pay that, and then we'll use that to then in turn pay the artist, and we'll sell the songs one song at a time rather than selling them, you know, $15 to $20 to go buy a CD, which everybody wants the MP3 version.
Right.
Sell it to them, but sell it to them at a price that they'll be willing to buy.
Yes.
Well, they all laughed at him in this meeting. Like, here's these bigwigs in the music industry who laughed at Steve Jobs. And this is what I remember of that story, was that Steve Jobs said, I did not come in here to ask advice on how to do this. I came in here to give you a solution to your problem. And so that's what I think of when I think of like David in this armor. He's like, I can't use this. And so David takes that armor off, gets 5 smooth stones and a sling. Let's keep going, because I didn't want this video to be quite this long. So let's keep reading what happens next. So then I'm picking up in verse 41. So then in 41, now we actually face the giant. So the Philistine came and began to draw near to David, and the man who bore his shield went before him. And then the Philistine looked about and saw David. He disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. And so the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with sword and spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And so it was, when the Philistine arose and drew near to him to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And then David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. And so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out from its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. This story, here's David facing now the finally the giant that he had come out. We knew from the beginning that he was coming out to fight this giant. David didn't know. David was there to take cheese to his brothers. And so David now with no armor, a sling and a stone, 5 stones in his sack, he goes out, and here comes Goliath. Goliath sees him, and now Goliath begins to mock him. This is the last thing I want to say about when you face an actual giant. That giant is going to mock you, and the mockery will seem reasonable in that moment. I mean, it's a reasonable mockery. Like Goliath is like, of all of your men, Eliab, Saul, all your men, this is what you sent to fight me?
That's what you're putting out here?
You gave me the smallest guy. I mean, like, when it says that Goliath...
It's like an insult.
It is an insult. Like, for Goliath, I think that he was like, when it says that he disdained him, this was not like child's play, like laughing it off, like, oh, the kid's going to come play me in a game of basketball. Goliath is like, are you serious right now? Like, this is what... He's
40 days, you guys were trembling in your boots?
And then you sent me this? And he's like, come on out here. I'm going to feed your flesh to the birds. And then even more, David fires back at him. But it's what David said, that he says, you come at me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come at you. And he didn't say with the sling and a stone.
Right.
He didn't say with tiny arms. He said, I come at you in the name of the Lord. And that's when we look at everything else, when I have to deal with like other people's insults, when I have to deal with the experts trying to tell me that I can't do what God's told me to do, when I'm dealing with all of that, the way to handle that is a little bit different. But when it comes to facing the giant, when you're actually in front of the giant, here's the one thing you have to remember is that if God has called you to do it, he'll see you through it.
That's right.
And you can't take that part away.
I love that he doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called.
That's right.
And this is the perfect example of that.
He looks at the giant and he says, I come at you in the name of the Lord. And so today I'm going to take your head from your body and I'm going to feed your body he like repeats it back to him. He's like, I'm going to feed your body to the birds, and I'm going to feed the Philistine, the whole army. I'm going to feed the whole army to the birds. And so, he's fired back at Goliath, and Goliath is now going to come towards him. And I love this part as well. David did not retreat, not even one step. When Goliath made a move towards David, David went running.
I love that so much.
Goliath. Like I honestly never really paid much attention to that portion until I preached it the other week, and I'm like, he went running after Goliath. Yeah. He didn't stand still and sling and wait for him. He was not a defensive measure. He charged after Goliath, and it reminds me of the line that I love so much that Jesus said, which was, upon this rock I'll build my church. And then he said, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Gates are defensive. When we think about that, like we often think like, oh yeah, we're the church, like we're defended, like we're in this like place of security. The gates are on hell. We're charging the gates. We're infiltrating the gates. If you think about it from those terms, we're going into the gates, going past the gates of hell, and those gates can't hold us out.
That's right.
And then I think of what the psalmist David, when David, who's going to be king, he's the psalmist, he writes a bunch of psalms. And the psalmist David, he said this, if I make my bed in hell, you're there. And so, when I think about like this, he goes running into this battle. He goes running into this battle because he has full faith that God can and will deliver the giant into his hand. Notice how I said that. It's not David thought God can and will deliver me from the giant. David thought and knew the Lord can and will deliver the giant into my hand. I will have this giant's head today if I run into this battle. There's one surefire way to make sure that you don't receive the thing that God's called you to do. Don't try.
Yeah.
Retreat, back up. We so
let
often...
fear creep in.
Yeah, let fear creep in. That happens to us often. I know for me, I've had these times in my life where I've done something and it failed. And then the next time I go to do something, I think about that time that I did something before and it failed. And I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I want to do that again. And those two things could be totally different. I mean, it could be something like, oh, I did an advertisement when I ran guitar lessons back when I was 18 years old, and that didn't really work well. And then now I'm over here, 14 years later, and we're trying to do a whatever. And I think back to this, time that I did something and failed. And it's so funny the way that our minds can flip around.
Yeah.
David was using all of the things that God had done for him as a means to charge into that battle.
Yes.
So I hope you can see like what I'm trying to get at is there's like a mindset here that says if you're going to face a giant, overcome the fear, overcome the insults of those who are around you, overcome what the experts are telling you that you can't do. And then when you go into that battle, charge after what God has told you to do without any fear that the thing's going to overcome you, but know that God's going to use you to overcome it.
That's right.
All right. One last thing, and then we're going to wrap this whole, or land this whole bird, because we made this a really long video. But it happens when I have guests on here. Whenever I bring in guests.
It happens when you've got such an amazing story like this, which
good point.
The Bible is full of them,
Yeah.
But this is a good one.
In verse 51, check this out, guys. Therefore, David ran and stood over the Philistine, took a sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And now when the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley of the gates of Ekron and wounded the Philistines, and the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road of Sharim, and even as far as Gath and Ekron. And then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And then Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, and he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. And so the king said, inquire whose son this young man is. And then David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine. Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son is this young man? And David said, I am the son of your servant, Jesse the Bethlehemite. So David kills Goliath, inspires all of the rest of the army that's been trembling.
That's right.
To go after the battle, to go after the fight. They did. Everybody goes, they're killing Philistines. The Philistines are now in retreat, and now Israel is inspired, and Israel is doing what they should have been doing all along, which was not retreating and going and fighting in the battle. Now you can make an argument and say, yeah, but God obviously had this planned and God had this orchestrated that, David was going to do this. It doesn't change the fact that Israel should have been the ones to do it. It's like when Jesus was talking about, he's like referencing Judas, but he's also referencing some of the other things, like some of the Pharisees, and Jesus was like, woe unto the man who these things come to. It must be, but woe unto that man who they come. Like the two things work simultaneously. The Israelites should have went into this battle. They should have fought Goliath, but they didn't. David went and did it, but look what happened when he did. He inspires all the rest of the army. When you step out by faith and do what God's called you to do, you will inspire those who are around you to do the same.
That's right.
And so then they all go out in the battle and they're all winning. And then I love this last part as well, because then Saul looks at Abner, his right-hand man, and he says to Abner, whose son is that? I think there's something really metaphorical and beautiful there, as you can imagine that when you step out and work for the Lord and do something miraculous in the Lord's name, then something happens. The rest of the world looks at us, and in similar fashion to what they said of Saul, Saul said, whose son is that? You have the same opportunity when they go, who is that? Who is that person? Whether that's your neighbor, maybe it's your family. I mean, don't think on a national level. That might make you think, oh, well, I don't have any, nobody's going to relate to me on a national level. Well, maybe not, but what about your neighbors? What about your friends? What about your church?
That's right.
What about those people who've doubted? What circle of influence do you have that they go, who is this guy?
That's right.
And then, just like Abner was able to say, he's the son of Jesse, David had ran into that fight saying, I come to you in the name of the Lord. And I'll tell you this, when you stand against a giant, here's what happens. You'll not only inspire others, but you get to be a testimony of your Father in heaven,
Amen.
who has done something great for you and done something great through you.
That's right.
And that never happens if you run in fear. The Bible says like what? I mean, hundreds of times. I can't remember what that number is. Do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. How many times has the Bible told us not to fear? And yet that's the very first thing that we have to overcome to face that giant.
That's absolutely right.
And so if you'll overcome those, I think this is, if I in the same place that I began. If you look at the story as a whole, the actual fight between David and Goliath, as cool as that story is, it's only 4 verses. The actual sling and stone is only 1 verse. But all of the things that surrounded it in that whole story of David going into this battle. And of course, this is going to bring David, it's going to level David up in the kingdom. He's going to become the king. Now he's getting this national notoriety, but it happened because he went and he faced the giant.
That's right.
And so I don't know what God's encouraging you to do. I don't know what he's put in your life right now. I'm on YouTube, you guys, or maybe Facebook. Facebook gets more views than YouTube right now. So, but who knows what it'll be in the future. So, right now you're watching this on some online platform. You're watching this video that I've made. I do not know you. So if you feel the Lord telling you, if the Lord's drawing you to something, then I would encourage you to trust the Lord, step out in faith and do what he's called you to do. Don't let fear be the thing that holds you back. Don't let your brothers and sisters insulting you be the thing that holds you back. Don't let don't let the experts talk you out of it because it's something that they're not doing.
That's right. Instead, step out and change their faith, their view of what's going to happen.
Yeah. I've got all these like stories reeling in my head.
I do too.
We've got like a 15-minute video going on here. So I'm going to stop us there and say thank you guys for joining us through the story of David and Goliath in 1 Samuel 17, and come back tomorrow as we get into 1 Samuel chapter 18. And you know what I want to do one more thing. If you made it all the way to the end of this 55-minute video, and if you liked having Kelly here with me, leave it down in the comments, and then we'll know if
if you didn't, be nice.
Yeah, be nice. Nobody's saying be mean. I'm just saying like, leave down the comments. And then that way I can use that to be like, oh, Kelly, come down, come do another video with me. Or if you're like, Justin, you made that video way too long. Well, then,
Well, that's not my fault.
Okay, guys. All right. Thank you all for being here. See you tomorrow.